The vendors are trying to find the problem space as the problem they can solve. So I'm constantly going, no, stop that, put that down, don't touch that, take that out of your mouth.
Today is January 18th, 2015, and this is episode 102 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's Sunday.
It is Sunday. And fortunately, I even have tomorrow off, which is a miraculous thing.
That's great. Unfortunately, I don't.
So it's kind of like a Saturday for me.
Screw you.
And that's the show. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer, some of who are not making us work tomorrow.
Well,
apparently.
I'm still in my honeymoon phase with my new employer anyway, so.
True.
Give it a couple of months.
All right, so jumping into our stories, our first story tonight.
Well, hey, before we do that,
sure.
I just want to make a shout out and say I'm sad that I wasn't at ShmooCon. I really wanted to be at ShmooCon. Watching all the tweets, it looked like a good time.
Definitely so. And I did watch a lot of the live stream, although there were quite a few streaming problems.
I saw that. I saw one tweet where apparently there was some Windows updates that was getting in the way of getting a stream up and going.
Is that what it was?
That's what they said.
Okay.
I don't have any. I'm just repeating what was on their Twitter feed for ShmooCon, but I have been to Shmoo once before. It's so tough to get tickets, which is a frustration for a lot of people, including me, but it was a good time. My buddy, who has since left us, Michael Hamlin, who we're actually having a memorial for, a second memorial in Atlanta this week, got me tickets, and I had a great time, so that's yet another thing I have to remember him by. But all that being said, Shmoo is a good conference. If you get a chance to go, I would recommend it.
Yeah, there were a number of really good talks. I only had time so far to watch a couple of them. The one on bypassing application whitelisting was really interesting. There are a couple of other ones. Like I said, the stream problems really were so problematic that I couldn't actually follow the whole session. So I need to go back and watch them. There were some talks on open source intelligence gathering and things like that looked like they would be really good, but due to the stream problems, I couldn't follow them. But in any event, you're right. It did look like a great show. I'm hopefully going to try to get out maybe next year.
It just all depends on those tickets.
If I can
sell in
hit F5 fastest, I guess. Right?
Yeah, milliseconds. Unless we can, pull some podcast, levers and go as media. I don't know. It's a thought.
Oh, we could bribe them with defensive security swag, like.
Yeah, because that's valuable.
Yep.
Look, it's a defensive security T-shirt. Great, I need something to wash my car with. Oh,
Ouch. So, yeah, with that, how about we go get into stories?
Fair enough.
Our first story comes from Dark Reading, and the title is "A Lot of Security Purchases Remain Shelfware." I suspect this isn't a big surprise to anyone, but there was a survey done here by Osterman Research, who I've never heard of before, but it was I guess sponsored by TrustWave, and they surveyed 172 companies, and they found that 30% of the respondents report that they have made investments in security tools or software that are being underused or not used at all. And one company in particular that they said reported that 60% of their security software was shelfware. And, it's kind of a long article, but the net of it is they interviewed a number of different people that a lot of this ties back to two things. Number one is the motivation for purchasing this stuff in the first place is a lot of times compliance driven. And then the other is that they don't have the talent, the skills, the resourcing that's needed to run it. And I've personally seen that in spades quite often. So
yeah, ditto.
You know, it's an interesting thing to me because, especially as time marches on, IT is becoming more and more of a commodity thing, and the concept of wasting money is just really interesting, I guess. But they did point out the very last sentence of the article I think is a bit telling, and they point out that I'll just read the quote verbatim. In some cases, you get the non-technology business leadership putting pressure on security, saying, "I don't want to be the next big target of a cyber attack. So what are you going to do about it?" And the CISO often responds with, "I get the fanciest firewall I can get." And, there you have it.
They make a couple of other good points that I like, that things that we've often said on this show, which is that not only is some of the gear not being utilized properly or not being utilized, but it can add a false sense of security because people high up in the organization believe that they might be having proper security implemented when they don't, and so therefore feel that they're at less risk than they're probably actually at.
That's a really good point because if you are at a certain level in the organization, what yardsticks do you have to measure your security posture? And one of the most obvious is how much money are you spending on it?
Yep. I think part of the problem too here is the CapEx versus OpEx debate. Organizations are okay spending on capital expenditures, but not necessarily on operational expenditures. And for those who don't know that business term, CapEx usually covers purchasing a product, whereas OpEx covers the people to run that product.
Right.
And I really do think that's a huge problem. I don't know that people are factoring in the budget for people when they go out and buy these products. Or if they are, maybe this is the oft discussed security talent shortage biting these guys. And they mention in here too that often leads to managed services coming into the picture.
But don't you think that in some cases at least, and I don't know if this is in a lot of cases or not, but the vendors or the purveyors of these security technologies don't really help the situation because they're they either opaque they're opaque in what it takes to run it, or just downright dishonest, I guess, because they want you to buy their thing. And if they came out and said, well, to buy this fancy firewall, you need, in your kind of environment, you need 10 people versus, just put it in and it does great.
I'd say certain parts of vendor organizations are like that, i.e. the sales guys. I don't know if the product managers or the professional services guys or senior leadership are as unethical in that discussion.
Fair. But going back to the CapEx versus OpEx, I did see the comment about engaging managed security services as an alternative to bringing on talent, but most of the time that's OpEx as well, right?
That's true. So then, I don't know if that leads towards we just can't find the right people. But I'll be honest, I don't think managed services are even close to a panacea. There's a lot of caveats when you go the managed services route, and I don't know that senior executives really understand the downsides of going managed services around security.
Yeah, absolutely. And most often you have to have your own overlay. Even if you outsource it, you have to have your own overlay to be able to translate what your MSSP is doing to take action for within your business. So
yeah. You still need to understand your individual organization, your risks, your culture, your risk tolerance, and your business goals. End of the day, the MSSP is really just handling the care and feeding typically and processing changes as you request them. That doesn't mean they understand what is normal and not normal and what they should and shouldn't. And, yeah, they can tune your IPS and they can make firewall changes, but that doesn't mean they necessarily understand exactly what is the right stuff for those bits and pieces to be kicking out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen interesting, not really conflicts of interest, but right, different incentives by MSSPs who obviously follow the if it's not measurable, it's not manageable kind of mantra, and therefore they have to escalate a certain number of tickets per customer per time period, and that can lead to interesting problems too, because now a customer might not trust the veracity of the data that's coming out of their MSSP, and everything you said, right? It's a complicated problem. I think security, as we've said and you often say, is very local to your business, and when you've got a business partner like an MSSP in there who is, you're just one of hundreds or thousands, they can't really practically customize their operation to suit you. So,
yeah, there are some times and places where they help and it makes sense. I'm not saying that overall it's a bad decision. What I am saying is that there are caveats and there are drawbacks and limitations of managed services that I don't think are typically fully understood by leadership when they're making that decision.
Fair enough. So moving on to our next story here. I guess before we go off, the point there is if you're going to invest in technology, you really need to do some due diligence on what it's going to take to properly operationalize that technology and build it into your business case. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up, at best, with having to go back and justify after the fact additional headcount or additional expense. And at worst, you could sit on the shelf and be a wasted investment. So,
the other thing I would say is, what are you doing to test that security technology is actually functioning correctly and working as it should be? Are you testing it in some way?
That's a great point. All right, so again, moving on, the next story is from Ars Technica, and the title is Google drops more Windows 0 days. Something's got to give. So I thought this was an interesting follow-up to the story we talked about last week. So, there was even more Windows 0 days that Google has released. Actually, two, in fact. One of them apparently was not all that important. It impacted only Windows 7, and Microsoft said they're not going to fix it, and Google said, we wouldn't either. The second one was a more significant information disclosure bug that impacts apparently most versions of Windows. And that was supposed to be patched in this last week's Patch Tuesday release. But apparently there, in grand Microsoft fashion lately, there was a bug. I suppose the good news is they didn't release the buggy patch like they have a few times in recent history. But the downside is that Google went ahead with their announcement, which basically meant that this patch or this vulnerability was going to be unpatched, or is going to be unpatched until next month's Patch Tuesday. So, this is just continuing the bad blood, I think, between Google and Microsoft. Although Microsoft seemed to have a little bit more measured of a response to Google this time. So, but the drumbeat continues, and I think as the title says, something's probably going to give, right? I don't know what it's going to be yet.
I don't know. Why does something have to give? I don't see it necessarily changing. I see Google continuing to follow this 90-day time bomb approach, or whatever you want to call it, and I continue to see Microsoft standing by Patch Tuesday. And if they get it done in time, they get it done in time. There is something to be said for the fact that when patches come out on a regular timed basis, enterprises have the opportunity to test, plan, and deploy them in a rational manner that is not disruptive to the organization. We seem to assume that all patches are created equal and should have been immediately installed without any testing, and that's just not the case. So I think Microsoft's kind of in a tough spot here because they have to cater to their enterprise customers when it comes to patching and the disruptions that patches cause. And so they're in a position of saying, hey, if we keep going back to the approach of throwing patches out willy-nilly, we're going to cause probably more instability and more downtime. And it's a tough position for them to be in. At the same time, I'm not saying that what Google is doing is wrong, but I could foresee this stalemate continuing for a long time.
Yeah, this story's been unfolding pretty publicly on social media and in news articles, and the general consensus, I would say, is that people expect Microsoft is going to change their policy or their practice. So I think that's what the reference in the title's about. But you could be right. Everybody could just be continuing as they are, I suppose. But and also, by the way, I agree with you on the timed releases. I think monthlies. I don't know if monthly's the right frequency or not, but I can tell you that quarterly, like Oracle, is probably not the right time frame. So,
yeah, it's a challenge. I don't know that I have a better idea right now. I'll put it that way.
No, that's fair. All right. So anyway, I included that one because it was a follow-up to last week's story. Nothing earth-shattering there. The next story we have comes from eWeek, and the title is Why Effective Computer Security Means Covering All Your Bases. So this article is an interview with LinkedIn's chief security person named Ganesh Krishnan. And Ganesh goes through and I think essentially highlights some of the big risks with phishing. He basically says that, hey, look, as defenders, we're grossly outnumbered, and therefore we need to, as an organization, we all need to pitch in and pay attention to security. And I think that's even more particularly relevant because of the risk of phishing. And I find that really interesting because LinkedIn is one of the sources commonly used for spear phishing. And in fact, recently there's been a couple of phishing campaigns using LinkedIn to harvest credentials. So, but anyway, there was one thing he did say. He gave some key tips. And his key tips are to log everything and keep the data for at least a year, including firewall logs, VPN logs, and access and antivirus logs. I think that's a very important thing. Hopefully people have that, gotten that message so far. And he goes on, well, I guess I already covered the phishing part. So anyway, anything you picked up out of it?
No, it's pretty solid points. He talks about, getting the secure development lifecycle with your developers, preventing phishing, testing your employees by doing live, safe phishing attacks against your own environment. I get it. Those are all good things to do. I don't think there's anything too earth-shattering here.
The one thing that I did want to bring up, I lost it in my notes, is that the reliance on people being able to detect a spearfish or even more contemporary mass phishing is becoming much more difficult. And I think it's becoming, I would say, a little dangerous to assume that mere education is going to be a reasonable backstop to protect against phishing. And, I was thinking, I was just kind of playing that out in my mind. If you train people to fear phishing enough, it's kind of going to create gridlock, because people have a job to do.
That's a really good point. That there is a certain value of diminishing returns on getting people to fear email too much.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not saying that I have a lot better answer other than things we've talked about in the past, like limiting the amount of damage that can happen as a result of somebody's computer being compromised through phishing, and looking at what are the best practices of the day in preventing malware, and even so, there's really not a lot of solid solutions. Everybody's testing not everybody, right? But many of the malware authors are testing their wares against, not only the traditional virus sets, but also, the FireEyes and the AMTs and other related things. So, that those controls are becoming less and less useful. I would say that probably some of the more useful things are the application whitelisting, commonly available today, right? So,
yeah, again, not perfect, as we've seen a lot, but
a lot better. Raises the bar.
Yeah, it makes it a lot tougher for those guys to get through. Absolutely.
All right, so our next story comes from Krebs on security.
I will say,
ahead.
just before we jump off that, though, to be a little snarky, when I'm like, hey, we got a story from the guy who runs LinkedIn's security, I expected a little more out of this article. He really doesn't go into much detail about much.
No. And, I wondered, it was probably a little tenuous or difficult, right? Because of, and LinkedIn's had some interesting information security past, right?
Yeah.
And they for a time had the nickname of LeakedIn,
right?
So I'm sure they're being a little cautious as they come out of the gate. But I agree with you, and I also found I found it just immensely ironic that the main theme of his point was phishing when LinkedIn is the thing that many of the spearfishers will use to target their marks.
Yeah, you think that he would have gone into how to know a real email from a fake one, how to verify LinkedIn. Don't click on any of the things that say they're from LinkedIn. Go launch a browser, log into LinkedIn directly. I was kind of expecting that kind of stuff.
Or be measured in what kinds of things you list, as far as your skills or what have you, because, let's face it, if you want to target a bank, right? What are you going to do? You're going to search LinkedIn for that bank's name, and you're going to, from there, you can find out, okay, well, based on their job openings, what kind of technology do they have? Based on, who's working for them and what they have listed as their responsibilities, who do I want to target my phishing campaign against? And maybe I use LinkedIn directly as the platform, and maybe I don't. So, yeah, you're right. I think they could have done more. All right, so moving on. The next story comes from Krebs on security, and this is also a follow-up to a story we covered last. I guess it was December. So, two parking providers, Park&Fly and OneStopParking.com, at the time had apparently been breached. And as it turns out, both of them have admitted publicly to being breached. Park&Fly, they released a statement that basically said that they are working with third-party data forensic experts to investigate, and the data compromise has been contained. And the potential, the one thing by the way, take that as a takeaway. I think this is a great way to not phrase things. They characterize the credit card data that was stolen as being at risk. And I would say that the data is not at risk. The data has been stolen, right? It isn't at risk. People who might continue to use your site might be at risk. This is a two different, so it's I guess a fine line in my mind, I suppose. But anyway, they say that the data potentially at risk include credit card numbers, cardholder name, billing address, expiration date, CVV, other loyalty customer data, including email addresses, passwords, and telephone numbers. So, awesome. And Krebs also contacted Park and Fly, who admitted in an email exchange that they were compromised using a vulnerability in Joomla, which, by the way, is one of the most popular remote access tools on the internet. Not many people know that.
This is the kind of hard-hitting journalism you provide to the show, Jerry.
I do what I can. So anyway, in any event, apparently Joomla was exploited using patches, or using a vulnerability that was patched back in September. So they knew that the site was vulnerable, but however, they did not patch it because that patch broke some portions of their website. So they accepted the risk.
Well, that is actually such an interesting topic to me right now, because most of the philosophy around this sort of thing is, well, just go patch. Well, sometimes you can't just go patch. So then it comes down to what other techniques can you utilize, especially when it's a known live exploit that's being seen in the wild. How else can you defend against that exploit? Whether it's a web application firewall sitting in front of it, whether it's something that, okay, we know this might happen. How can we instrument the heck out of our website to make sure we know the minute it does happen? You can't just say, well, it's going to break stuff we can't patch, and throw your hands up and walk away. There's got to be a third option other than patch or don't patch.
Right. And I think that is a very important lesson. And also, as we've also said, be able to detect when someone has gotten in and gotten past your other controls. So that's another key thing that apparently is missing here as well. So yeah, it was, in this article, Krebs goes on to describe how these cards were for sale on the same sites that Home Depot, Target, Sally Beauty, P.F. Chang's, Harbor Freight, and a bunch of other companies' credit cards were for sale on. However, they were for sale in a different way, right? They're called CVVs instead of dumps, so they're only usable online.
So clearly, as part of your data leak prevention system, if you in some way are a retailer, you should be monitoring that website, is what it really comes down to.
I agree, yes. I think banks are.
Brian Krebs is my IDS. I've seen that T-shirt floating around.
I have as well. Actually, Brian Krebs retweeted somebody's picture wearing one, so pretty cute.
That's got to be a little surreal.
I would think so. But anyhow, if you're a retailer, that might be a good thing to, I don't know if you could do a honey record or what, but I do know from some previous releases by Krebs that banks apparently do actively monitor. And actually, I think it's more than monitor. I think they actually buy, from time to time, they buy some of these.
Hence fueling the underground economy.
Well, they got to eat.
This is true.
All right, the next story we have comes from Data Breach Today. The title is Report, Mercenaries Behind APT Attacks. We need ominous music here.
Dun, dun, dun.
And the subtitle is Espionage as a Service Offers Government Deniability. So this is a pretty lengthy interview or report on a on a paper that was released by, I guess it's pronounced TAIA, TAIA Global, which is Jeffrey Carr's company. And basically what the long and the short of it is that they have detected at least in some instances, some of these otherwise credited as nation-state attacks are actually being performed by contractors, third-party organizations of varying capabilities, funding, sophistication, and there are some advantages. They do go into Sony a little bit and say that hey, if it was North Korea that was behind this, it's conceivable that they actually hired someone else to actually execute the attack, right? So,
which, by the way, not saying that did happen, but that would help answer a lot of the weirdness around Sony.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I said, it's a pretty long article. He cites specifically two cases, one of which is in the U.S. There was a Chinese business person who was indicted in Canada for stealing, I guess it was violating the ITAR, for stealing data on the F-22, the F-35, and the C-17. And his co-conspirators, who apparently weren't named, were alleged to have been the people responsible for the intrusion. And it's not believed that they are in cahoots with the government, and the Chinese government. So most likely it is a case where they are, they're buying it for a competitor or an adversary, or they are stealing it to then go try to put it on the market. So don't really have that bit of information. There's another case related to Airbus, which has a similar kind of a flair. One of the points they bring up here is that unlike credit card data, you can't go to a website clearinghouse and find F-35 plans for sale. So it's kind of difficult to tell
maybe not on the websites you go to.
Oh, fine, okay. I just don't hang on to the right parts, I suppose. But
sorry, go on.
No, so it's difficult to tell where this information is going from and going to. So I think it's an interesting point that I've been concerned about for a while, and that is that these, especially in this post-Edward Snowden world, right? None of this stuff is that complicated, right? It is not to take it away from the skill level that it takes, but a lot of this stuff doesn't take a nation level funding, right? It takes some skilled people.
Correct.
No question. And I think in my mind at least, one of the key things that was missing is simply the creative genius behind the methods. And I think that though a lot of the details of implementation weren't disclosed in Edward Snowden's leaks, just the simple ideas are I think fueling a kind of a boom. And and also Stuxnet and Gauss and Flame and all of those, Regin. I think these, they call them mercenaries, right? I think these mercenaries and others like them are paying attention, and I think we're going to see their capabilities grow, and that's really problematic because for a couple of reasons. One, like with Sony and North Korea, you may see some really odd cases of foreign policy being crafted based on bad attribution, as we've talked about in the past. But the other is there's just going to be a lot more of them, and people or organizations who would not otherwise be victim to something so sophisticated are now going to find themselves having to defend themselves against, this kind of technique. And we said in the past, if the NSA is your adversary, it's kind of game over, right? They can outspend you 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 to 1. It's just a fact of life. But if many of the same tactics and techniques are available to, Bob, the data exfiltrator for hire, you've got problems. So I think this is going to be a developing space that we need to really pay attention to.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not surprising. I'm glad it's getting some press. I have a couple of views on this. It's something I've said often on this show. If you are an enterprise and you are charged with defense, frankly, I don't think attribution matters. I don't think it matters who's attacking you. You still have to defend against it. And let's say you figure out that tomorrow some random group's coming after you. What are you going to do differently in that time frame? It's probably game over at that point if you haven't already developed your defenses to the point that you're ready to go. You can't dig the moat and put up the walls in 12 hours. So that being said, attribution is not something I think most enterprises need to care a lot about. I think they need to care about running their defenses well, spotting those low and slow attacks, spotting the data exfiltration, assume they're being breached all the time, and go after that stuff. Who's doing it is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I suspect, and I know that this has been a bit of a hot topic with people like Richard Baitlick, right? And I will tell you, I think that there may be a narrow segment of the economy where it makes sense because they have, and I'm pontificating or I'm being flip here, right? But they have become so sophisticated in their defense capability that it makes sense for them now to worry about or to think about who their adversary is because they've got everything else so damn locked down.
Great. All right. If you're there, rock on. You probably
exactly.
Right.
But otherwise, I think you're spot on because it doesn't matter if it's the Liechtensteinian or the Luxembourgian government or if it's or
the Albanians who are
yes,
absolutely feared amongst those of us on the blue teams. However, I just see so many CISOs in their talking points. We need to understand who our adversary is, so we understand their techniques and tactics. And I think that's all bunk. I really do. I think you need to understand techniques and tactics. I don't think that in any way matches up with your adversary.
Yeah, I think you hit on the point. You need to understand what are the techniques and tactics and tools that are being used. Period.
Right.
Right, because those techniques and tactics, they very well might be used by the Russian government today. But next week, when the Luxembourgians see what the heck the Russians have been doing, well, now they've adopted it. And by the way, one of the Snowden releases or leaks today, I don't know when it came out, right? But talked about how the NSA was watching one government attacking another government, and they saw the attacking government using 0 days, and so they co-opted the 0 days and started using it for their own advantage. That kind of thing, I bet, happens all the freaking time. And it's not just a government thing, right? All of these leaks, like I said, they are priming the pump. They are giving really smart people ideas on how to go do this stuff. I mean, one of the talks at ShmooCon was given by the NSA Playset people, which is a fantastic talk, by the way. Again, same problem with the live stream feed. I could only see about half of it, but the part that I saw was really cool. The whole problem here is just one of imagination. This is a situation of, the code isn't beyond the capability of many people to write. The tools aren't beyond the capability of many people to build. It's just a matter of thinking it through and having an idea. And now these ideas are out there. We're seeing details from, classified document leaks, from Mandiant and other reports, from antivirus company write-ups on malware. It's coming from all different sources. They're all learning from each other. And I think that makes the point on attribution not being a really relevant topic to the 99% of companies really a key factor. So
there's really no unique capabilities out there.
Right. Or if there are, it's not unique for long.
Right. And it still doesn't change your defense. You still have the same set of controls and the same problems to deal with.
Right.
And especially because nowadays we're assuming a breach will happen. So how they breached, yeah, you want to stop it. But if that's the only thing you're focusing on, you're probably losing. You really need to be focusing on identifying that breach happened quickly.
Right.
So the other thing is we don't really talk politics on the show much. This is getting into a little politics of I think it's very plausible and realistic and likely that various organizations, various governments are hiring out to mercenary hacker groups. That makes perfect sense. But this makes, as we said, attribution hard. But they mentioned something in here that I was not aware of that I need to do some more looking into. And quoting from the article, the so-called Talon report from the United Nations states that cyber attacks can be viewed as armed aggression and treated as an act of war.
Yeah, that came out last year. There was a big hoopla about that.
I missed it, and I guess this is a NATO document because when you actually go follow the link, it goes to NATO's websites and whatnot. So all that being said, now attribution at a government level starts to become a lot more sketchy and a lot more imperative. Right? Because now this could launch, we've joked about the fact that the Sony hack could launch a war with North Korea, and a good chunk of the non-government InfoSec experts out there are not convinced that it was North Korea. But if NATO feels that this could be, an act of war, frankly, it's really, 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 really easy, relatively speaking, to spoof and do a false flag on somebody else as the origin of attack to start an armed conflict. And that's something that is kind of scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And as a matter of principle, we are not even going to mention, aside from this point, the silly, silly, silly movie Black Hat that just came out, because that's just not.
I haven't seen it yet. I've heard that it's not as horrible as it could have been, but that's all I've heard. So.
Yeah, no, not going to go there. So all that being said, I don't see that this changes the game much. I think it's that makes perfect sense. It's something we've assumed going on for a while, and I think we'll see more and more examples of this, but it just makes attribution that much harder.
Well, from my standpoint, I hope that organizations can take this kind of report and use it as evidence that we shouldn't worry about whether it's Russia or China trying to steal our credit card data. That isn't the thing that we should be worrying about. It should be more along the lines of the techniques and the tactics. So that's I think that for me that's what I hope people get out of it. So. Anyhow, moving on to our last story, which comes from ZDNet, and the title is New Report, DHS is a Mess of Cybersecurity Incompetence. Now, I know this is going to be a devastating thing for many people that listen to this. This is it's a very, very long article about a report that the U.S. federal government released, which was titled A Review of the Department of Homeland Security's Mission and Performance. And It's boy, where to start? So I would say one of the key takeaways is that there was some noise made or some statements made by the President of the United States saying that we need to improve our cybersecurity posture. We need to do a number of things. And this article kind of systematically pecks at each one of those, saying, this government issue report says that those things, as implemented by the Department of Homeland Security, are wholly ineffective, which is really concerning. So, I'm trying to find some of the key tidbits here. The section on cybersecurity, by the way, is titled "The Department of Homeland Security is struggling to execute its responsibilities for cybersecurity, and its strategy and programs are unlikely to protect us from the adversaries that pose the greatest cybersecurity threat." It is it's about 10 pages of just unmitigated governmental fail here.
It is just epic fail. And I'm not in any way giving these guys a pass, but one thing I've learned is the larger and more complex the organization, the more difficult it is to secure it. And I think this is clear that these guys are in way over their head on this stuff. And frankly, I don't know what they're going to do to fix it, but this article pretty much shows how amazingly incompetent the government security is. So whenever anybody says, well, so-and-so used to work with the government on IT security, I just laugh inside. I have yet to see a government organization and people come out of the government space do IT security better than private business.
Yeah, I do think you're right. It is related to your size, right? And
well, I think it's more than just that. I think it's the culture and the pay scale and everything else that goes into government service makes cybersecurity incredibly difficult. I think the military is the only ones who are really doing it well with a completely segregated, classified environment. And they actually do a decent job. Snowden accepted, that sort of thing. But otherwise...
Well, and they had their Twitter account hacked. So, I mean, I guess there was that.
Oh, my God.
There was that. Right.
Somebody guessed their password. Oh, my God. You're launching nukes from Twitter.
Was really shocking. What was the most shocking thing was how much analysis has been done about what does it mean that Central Command had their Twitter account compromised? And I think the more important question is, what does it mean that Central Command has a Pinterest account?
I, like many, had no idea these even existed. So it probably just raised their profile dramatically.
It's probably like the Burger King thing. Remember when Burger King faked their account getting hacked?
Oh, yeah. Well, do we even know if CENTCOM was using an outsourced media PR firm anyway for that?
I asked the question, and no, I never got a satisfactory answer. I would not be surprised to find out that they had.
That's pretty typical. It's pretty common.
I mean, it's a PR thing. It's not like they're...
It is.
Well, anyway, this report just goes on, and it talks about how they don't do a good job at patch man. Oh, actually, here's the quote. The subheading is DHS cybersecurity programs are unlikely to protect us. The report cautions about DHS's limited strategies, noting, while patching and cyber hygiene are clearly important, they are only basic security precautions and are unlikely to stop a determined adversary, such as a nation-state seeking to penetrate federal networks to steal sensitive information. And that is I think for me one of the concerning things is that in the private space, we don't have to worry about, for the most part, data being stolen that will result in lives lost or things like that. And it is concerning to see that being written about an organization who is chartered with protecting data that could result in such things. So, in any event,
couple of key takeaways I got from this. Just quoting, because it's so. If you read this, it is just epic fail after epic fail after epic fail. But quoting, one of the key concerns about the NCPS, which is the broad, basically intrusion prevention system, is that it relies heavily on signature-based detection. It operates by scanning traffic to and from federal networks for the fingerprints of known threats and vulnerabilities. Such systems can only protect against known threats with the same fingerprints. Welcome to 1998's techniques.
Wow.
Further, NCPS cannot detect hackers if their software uses a vulnerability that has not been publicly revealed, and DHS is not otherwise aware of so-called 0 days. So they have no 0 day protection. The report found that along with unimplemented programs, employees ignoring security protocols and updates, and incompetent response drill teams, the DHS is wasting tons of money on cyber programs. It explains that, quote, the DHS currently operates extensive programs across several of its components and directorates focused on cybersecurity, including programs within the National Protection and Programs Directorate, nearly $700 million annually, and the U.S. Secret Service, $10 million annually, and ISIS Homeland Security Initiative investigations component. To that, the report reveals DHS is paying program administrator costs for continuous diagnostics and mitigation general service administration contracts worth billions that, thus far, most of the rest of the federal government do not want to use. So they're trying to deploy things. The rest of the federal government saying, no thanks. Huge freaking mess.
Yeah, the thing that struck me, trying to think about, okay, how is this usable, or how is this useful to the common person? And, obviously it's a little concerning that there's a push to expand the domain of this group in what they're responsible for protecting into parts of private enterprise, which, I guess I'll refrain from commenting on that part. But it struck me that a lot of this stuff probably, if there were a congressional panel within companies that were to write up a critical dissertation on my information security program or your information security program, what would it say? And what does that say you should do differently? And so for me, it was kind of a thought exercise on given what was reported here and given what I know of my program, what would that report look like, and how does that inform what I think my priorities should be? So that's other than I thought it was an interesting and timely report.
Yeah, I would say one other takeaway I got it from an enterprise defense standpoint is you really need strong centralized leadership if you're going to be successful and effective.
Good point.
And you really need to have an overall unified vision and plan for information security. If you're going to try to do it in silos, if you're going to try to do it bits and pieces, you're never going to get it done.
That is a very good point. So that is episode 102 for the week. And as usual, we appreciate your time listening to us. If you have any ideas or thoughts or criticisms, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. If you want to find links to our stories, the show notes are available on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callan on Twitter at Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And, if you do like the show, please refer us to a friend and or give us a review on iTunes. That's always appreciated. It's internet points for us. We don't get anything other than the pleasure of knowing that, well, maybe we helped someone have a better week. So with that, I bid you adieu, and we will talk again next week.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Take care. So you need to call Geek Squad?
Yes, I do.
Cool.
I don't take no shit from a machine.